A guy whose channel is called Epiphany a Week has produced a video in defense of profiling on a channel, The Distributist. He's arguing against what he believes to be current acceptance that profiling is bad, from where the thought that profiling is bad has emerged. A critique of profiling is found in classical liberal doctrines as a consequence of the application of its principles. Epiphany a Week makes two fair points in his defense of profiling. He first argues that there are actual differences between different classes of people. That seems to be a legitimate point of view, for the whole classification in classes would be impossible if there were no perceived differences among different classes of people. The perceived differences may be superficial or deep, but they do exist. The second point he makes is that the argument against profiling, which is based on the idea that the collective differences among people are not perfect predictors of individual behavior, is too much fixated on perfection and has limited practical use, is indeed a good argument. Both of these points make sense. What, however, he does not deal with are more important criticisms of profiling. In a society that is more free than not, at least from a rhetorical point of view, one quick problem that emerges is lack of standards to make judgments from a legal or moral point of view in many cases. Early liberals knew this, and this is why they, at least in principle, argued against any character assessment of a person being viable. This formed the cornerstone of civil liberty. The individuals thus were not to be judged morally or on collective grounds. The reason of that is visible from the point that Epiphany a Week himself makes. He shows two pictures. One is of a young girl in pink clothes with a happy face. The other is a young man, most probably of a different race, with not so happy look on his face. Epiphany a Week then argues people to ponder which of the person is potentially more of a threat. The answer is obviously the young man. Here Epiphany a Week is trying to argue against what he believes to be left's stance against profiling. But Epiphany a Week fails to realize that the left has never been against profiling in a complete sense, nor have been the liberals. In actuality, the liberals and the leftists generalize and collectivize people all the time. Progressives often create caricatures of who they believe are oppressors, that is, the wealthy, the males, the religious, the heterosexuals, and the cisgender. The leftists and the liberals have never been against profiling in a complete sense. It becomes incumbent to think what Epiphany is trying to achieve with the video. Epiphany a Week probably believes, much like the New Right, that allowing profiling would separate good groups from bad groups and reward the so called good groups for their good behavior. The classes that are better in deed and conduct as a whole would benefit, and thus a standard for good conduct by the classes from the individuals would be socially mandated. That, however, is a very strange thing to consider because that is exactly what the left argues for, although not in the case of on those who it believes to be oppressed. Epiphany of Week's point is weak from both practical and philosophical point of view. From a practical standpoint, there are two problems associated with profiling. First is that if in these times the leftists and the liberals are able to get away with making prejudiced remarks and displaying bigotry, even while being champions against it, whatever makes Epiphany a Week believe that the standard of profiling would be allowed to set up according to what is actually sensible must be very potent. The second point is that profiling is actually practiced a lot. For people who naturally or through indoctrination have beliefs about difference in classes, they would in some way or the other try to act based on those beliefs because beliefs affect actions. We can see that, for example, in difference in sentencing for the same crimes between men and women. The court, the judges, and the jury are not free from profiling, nor is the police or most common men. However, when the left creates enough outrage against profiling of certain groups, people who fear adverse consequences of profiling limit their profiling in those circumstances. But here again, the power of left is easily visible. Legitimizing profiling is thus giving the left a hammer to strike on your back, while making yourself look bad in front of the masses and next generations for promoting supposedly discriminatory policies which affected your well being. From a philosophical point of view, the problem is actually more severe. While Nietzsche talked about it, I would refrain from explaining his complete position in this short video. But in a nutshell, the traits that generally create a problematic class also can, in other situations, make the class more desirable. For example, while it is true that a young man is more dangerous than a young girl because of higher aggression and strength, A young man also has the ability to use that higher aggression and strength to others' benefit, while a young girl is mostly a liability. The power to destroy also contains within itself the power to create. This is why emasculation of men is bad, even if it makes men as docile as a hypothetical docile woman, because society needs that aggression in many cases. The issue with profiling is that it would often benefit those cases where empathy is more prone to pour out, which interestingly Epiphany a Week also points out in his own article, the problem with empathy. This is why feminists were, for example, able to get away with profiling men while arguing against profiling of women. Thousands of men dying in a war, using the same aggression, which is believed to be bad and toxic, is a statistic. But the woe of a woman who has been called names on some social media for abhorrent behavior is a tragedy. One of the few things that classical liberals got right was that the populist judgment was always sketchy, and emotions triumphed statistics in such cases. Thus, for a free society, it was necessary that no judgment of character was undertaken unless explicitly required, even though liberals did not follow it because liberals are famous for just saying things to sound smart. West's own aversion to power and strength stems from the fact that a few individual stories of domination by the powerful are viewed as much worse than many individual stories of the powerful using the same power to benefit the perceived weak. Profiling in such a society augments that manifold. Epiphany of Weak's standard is so bizarre that even when being scientifically implemented to the best of our abilities, it would create massive problems. For example, under his standard, no business which cares about safety of people should hire men, because they appear to many as statistically more violent than women. But that is very much against the natural instincts he tries to defend. One might there argue that the male performance could outweigh the negative effects of more aggressive male behavior. Yet believing that could be dialectically argued while knowing people's strange bias to identifiable empathy is indeed a great error. Surprisingly, Epiphany of Week's standard would eventually become the standard that progressives crave for. This is the great unification of the two entirely different viewpoints.